I'm a psychiatrist. I'll try and keep it simple and not make it jargony, which I can often do. And I'm not going to teach a bunch of HR professionals to suck eggs about performance management. I'm just going to contextualize it within the person themselves. Because what happens sometimes the process is forgotten and sometimes the person is forgotten, and very rarely do we get it right when both are remembered together. Right? So how do we contextualize this? Can you guys hear me without this? Yeah, you need both. More?
Yes.
And the more you work with organizations now, we work with 120 plus organizations now, we're realizing that actually over the last 5 years, the complexity has gone up. Right? Up until maybe 2017, 2018, what we were working with was a lot of anxiety and depression and the mild stages. But what we're seeing now is a lot of complex mental illness, post-trauma, people with psychosis, people with serious addiction difficulties, all presenting within the workplace. So what we're seeing is this complex sort of web of even neurodiversity and ADHD, people presenting with lots of different things that we weren't seeing 5, 6, 7 years ago. Right? So has pandemic been an accelerator? I don't know, but things have definitely shifted in the ecosystem. We've been doing this as an organization for 10 years or 9 years now. I've been doing this for 25 years for a living, and things have definitely shifted, right? And the numbers have gone up. I'm not going to bore you with this, it becomes very boring. But what is the sign, right? When you're looking at a team and saying something is not right, what are we looking for? And some very high level, and these are very obvious, but sometimes I find it helpful to put them together. Right? So what are the obvious high level things they're looking for when we say that actually there might be a challenge? So absenteeism becomes a trend rather than an occurrence, right? We're saying, we talked about productivity a lot this morning, and I love to talk about productivity for a bit because I hate that word, and we'll talk about that for a bit. And then turnovers not in sync with the rest of the organization in a particular team. And then we're talking about stress levels, right? And there's a lot of ways of assessing that, and a lot of companies are doing a really good job of now at least assessing stress levels. So those 4 signs, when put together, you can say there's something not going right here. Right? So that's how I think about it. Talk about productivity. I think a lot of conversation around mental health in organizations boils down to productivity and is it going to give me a better ROI on dollars spent? And it's not been helped by a bunch of my colleagues over the last 15 years connecting the two concepts. Right? So the concept of ROI and productivity in the short term being measured in a way that's not really helpful and very biased from a research perspective sometimes really does skew the conversation. And what I'd say is that actually it's a disservice. You already put in the capital in, and to build a really valuable service or offering for your team members, don't muddy it with calling it a productivity tool. Right? And the reason I say this is because you lose trust. Right? I often say that when we make it so transactional, in the first conversation as an offering, you lose trust. You risk commodifying a very valuable aspect of your well-being. Right? It's a very short-term approach. I've been in conversations with very large organizations in Bombay where they've said, okay, abhi itna paisa lagayenge, to iska ROI kya hai? Year ke end tak, how will you know it worked? And I'm like, I don't know the answer to that, so I'm going to leave now and you work with somebody else. And then you end up adopting many supervision strategies because you're really focused on the NPS for that month or the sickness rates for that year, and that means you actually take a very short-termist view. And actually the counter of that is what Sunita was talking about. I mean, I've been talking to Unilever about this for 10 years now, I think, and the way they've gone on this journey is really, I mean, they should publish it more and they should just talk about it because they've just taken this massive long-term view of well-being and it's just reaping results now. But I understand everybody doesn't have that kind of resource. So even then, just the language we use, just the conversation we have, is it about saying we care about our people, really want them to come with their whole self to work and to their private lives, or is it just about productivity, right? So I think that becomes an important conversation. But now let's go back to the topic I was given and talk about performance management, right? And I think the first thing, I was in Delhi yesterday and talking to a bunch of very, very experienced mental health professionals. They were talking to me. We have a child mental health part of the organization and some very senior clinicians run it. And they were talking about how, as a child, you are often told that keep good company, keep good habits, parenting is important, and all the rest of it, right? So the context becomes very important. But suddenly when something is not going well, like fix the child. So, and then they're like, that just doesn't work. It works in a very short-term view, but actually you got to fix the entire context. And so you have contextualizing the performance management conversation in the wider ecosystem is important first, right? So we are saying that the three decisions about intention and strategy are quite interlinked. Right? We are saying that your work structure, your org culture, and your well-being are all so deeply interconnected that you just can't separate them. So anybody who has a conversation about interventions for mental health and isolation is just fooling themselves or fooling you. Probably the former actually. And so I think the whole idea of saying now, in that terrible analogy I'm going to make now, and if the employee is a child, and I'm not trying to suggest that as a framework at all, but I'm using that analogy from yesterday, then the context is important, right? It's just not, very rarely are the problems residing just within the individual. Now, the context might be outside work, but within work, but that context makes it very important, and recognizing and identifying that context becomes a key to really understanding performance. Because you cannot unlock that performance really unless you do that. I've been doing this for 25 years, but I've been running large teams for almost 15. And so putting those two hats together, we've seen this so often. You cannot do performance management in isolation. You can't look at productivity in isolation. You just have to look at first the three parts in context. How much effort, energy are you spending on org culture conversations and actually living the culture? How much are you talking about the importance of your people in real terms and actually putting it into action? And then how much you're looking at structure itself. So all three things become very key to actually driving the end goal that we all really want to drive to, which is having a healthy, happy workforce that actually is productive. Right? So that becomes the goal, right? So the context then becomes all those things, and performance management is just one aspect of it. So I'm just really contextualizing where performance management sits within my frame, in the context of actually looking at what well-being is about. And that's just one part of 1/3 of what you're trying to achieve. So looking at it in isolation never really works. So if you want to go back and look at everything, you got to just look at the whole thing and saying, what is not working? And if you have data like Unilever does, please use it. If you don't, then let's start collecting it. Because actually then I had these conversations 10 years ago saying we want information, and like, I don't have any. And we work with about 500,000 employees right now, and we still have very, very scant information after doing this for 10 years. Because data is just so poor in organizations. The motivation to collect data is almost always positively correlated with the overall well-being of the organization. I think because it almost is a proxy signal of how organizations value certain things and then how much emphasis they give to them. So actually, organizations that do have good information also typically have good practices, sort of maybe by correlation or by association. So I've been in places, including my own organizations, where we do this very badly, and I've been in places where they do it amazingly well. And in the places where they do it amazingly well, this is just not recognized as a separate piece of work. It's just seen as one part of a year-long experience, rather than being seen as an event that is going to change drastically your work scenario, right? So that's what one big overarching thing is, saying that is this going to be a traumatic month of March, or is it going to be just a gradual a year-long experience, basically, right? And organizations that make it a traumatic month of March or December, wherever you do your appraisals, are the ones that really struggle with not just not including mental health, mental well-being in the process, but actually negatively impacting mental health and well-being. So and this data, I'm sure you guys know this information given what you do for a living, but this is information that's now widely available, and just that we do this terribly badly. Like, we are very, very bad at doing performance management reviews. And if you're having a conversation, and you know this, right, but how well do your team leaders understand? If they're having a conversation with a direct report that's a surprise, an annual review, that's their management problem, not the employee's behavior or performance problem, basically. Because that is in itself is talking about a breakdown of structures that's going to impact somebody very adversely. Because somebody walks out of there feeling unsure, blindsided, negative, they're either going to leave or they're going to feel shit about themselves. So what are we going to do to have this as a continuous process rather than just an episode in your journey becomes very, very important. I think, and this again, this is obvious, but I'll just put it there, but I'll just let you read it rather than ramble on about it. How many of you feel that you've got this sorted? In the room, how many of you feel that you got it? I'm not going to ask you. How many of you feel that you got it sorted? Where you feel that actually this is a continuous process which is collaborative, two-way, and takes a wider context into account. So collaborative, two-way, and not just about numbers. How many of you feel that that's how your performance management system is right? Okay, how many of you don't feel that way? Just making sure the crowd's awake. So, I don't feel that way. We run a team of 300 people. I've got 5 of my team members in the room right now. I can tell you that we don't do it well. Right? It's hard. So I think the first thing to recognize is that it's hard, it's effortful, it requires thought and resource. And so, first of all, give yourself a pass. You don't do it well, because that's okay. Because nobody does. So most people don't do it. But then what can we do, right? I think the first is what's important to you as an organization. We have such few conversations about values and actually living values. And the reason that is because we don't really link any growth to our value systems in most organizations, right? We'll say that our people are important, or we'll say good leadership is important, but actually we'll give no credence to that when we do appraisal. We'll just make it about sales numbers, right? So some of the good organizations will say your appraisal depends on how well your direct reports rate you, right? Now that's a key component of your appraisal. Now that's living a value, if that's what you said. Or your user feedback or your customer feedback is a critical component of what your business is going to look like, not just your sales numbers, right? So how many of us are talking about that, and how many of us are aligning our values with the management system and translating into metrics? This is hard to do. It's very, very hard to do, especially when you're all running and just think. But if you're not putting thought into this, that's when the misalignment starts happening. We are saying one thing as an organization, we're expecting one thing as a team, and then we're rewarding something else, is where the problem really starts, basically, right? So how do we actually look at what our values are, what our organizational context is, and then within that, how do we measure it? Now that becomes so critical, saying, can we simplify? I'll give you an example, right? Saying, we say we put our service users first, right? So we do almost, 4,000 to 4,500 unique individual patients and families in a month. And we said that's the most important thing we do. Now, how do we value that as an appraisal ecosystem? We say, okay, that means our NPS scores, our resolution TAT, those become a key metric for success for everybody. Not just the clinician, not just the customer success person or client success person, but actually for everybody. Now, unless you do that, you're then not embodying that as a cultural value that's going to feed into your performance appraisal, and then you're going to really confuse people in talking a different language of what you stand for as a brand, as an organization, but actually delivering or rewarding different things altogether, essentially. So how do you actually integrate your values to your metrics, to your reward systems, becomes very, very important. I think, how do we move from this? I was a lecturer at a university for a long time, and how do you move from this summative process of saying you passed or failed, you did well or did badly, to saying, okay, you're on the journey with us, how do you help you? And we all do it so badly because it just doesn't seem important till something is going wrong. And we only start focusing on some of these things at most organizations when things are not really working. How do we actually flip it around and say, this is all about us growing, you growing, we growing together? And in that journey, how can we take a supportive approach and say, the review structure is transparent, and it's so hard to do. I mean, we don't do it well. I'm telling you very transparent today. We don't do it well today. We are a fast-growing organization. We've gone from 20 people to 350 people in like a year and a half. So we're still catching up with ourselves, basically. But if you're an established organization, how do you set up a transparent system? How do you make it about alignment with values, as I said, but also about supporting rather than a punitive system? How do you celebrate success privately and publicly, and then create space for difficult conversation that doesn't feel unsafe, that doesn't feel punitive, right? So how do you actually set the foundations of the nature of the conversation itself? Becomes very, very important. And it's hard again. And the first thing is alignment to cultural values. Second is changing the foundation of the conversation itself, right? And then within that, then you're saying, I mean, we touched on some of these things, but saying defining clearly what the expectation is, what success will look like as a behavioral marker, and what failure looks like is very important, right? So again, this is effortful, but more and more, this needs to be part of the new manager training, right? So as you bring on new managers, that's the time to sort of build this DNA of saying, how do we make this a part of cultural DNA, cultural conversations as to how we help people grow? Because I mean, that just makes good commercial sense. It's the right thing to do, but also makes good commercial sense to do it. And then third is you rebuild the process, right? You say, okay, as I said, this should never be an annual process, right? The increment could be an annual event, but the performance review should not be an annual process. It shouldn't even be, in my view, it shouldn't be a semi-annual process. It should be a continuous conversation, and that continuous could look like weekly, fortnightly, monthly, right? If that conversation, if that's a surprise, even if in a quarterly review it's a surprise, I think something's not worked in the relationship, and that should really be looked at. And again, how do you do that, but still do it in the context of your values, and measuring your values at an individual level, but also in the context of sort of making a safe, supportive conversation are both very, very important. Get feedback. We hate getting feedback on processes, right? We get a lot of feedback on each other and we do 360 reviews, but actually, I am not sure how many of us actually go back and get feedback on our processes themselves. So get feedback, because that will help you contextualize what is generic information and customize it to your organization and your cultural values. And that will sort of, and then it might lead to some discussions, right? We are doing this way, but these are our values. Are they in sync? And most of the time, team members will tell you, because if it's a good progressive team, they'll question the process if it's out of sync with the values that you're espousing, essentially. And now there's so much tech. I'm not going to spend time on talking about tech. There are a lot of people here who are going to sell you tech products to do all of this stuff. You should talk to them. But there's so much tech now. My mantra for it is less is good. Streamline and see what is the shortest path to getting the most information, right? Because otherwise the overload will just. But then I was an assessment scientist. My research was all in evaluation assessments, right? And so the more you do assessment overload, the more the validity of it goes down, basically. So actually keeping it as streamlined and saying, I want clean data points, frequent but less intensive. Right? So even if it's a small touch point, one question a month is much better than a 40-question survey every 3 months, basically. Right? So make it more frequent so that you're getting more real-time insights, but actually don't make it very intensive. Don't get 3 vendors doing 3 different surveys and then giving you information. You'll just tie yourself in knots, basically. But there's a lot of tech. Use the tech, because now if you're in a large organization, leveraging AI with data can give you insights that will take you days to mine. Now it can be done in 20 seconds, right? So leverage that possibility now, because that can just give you so much valuable information to just go faster. I don't need to tell you guys this. All the HR guys I've worked with all my life have told me that they spend half the time getting leadership by. So this is your bread and butter. So I'll just leave you with that one. I think that's it. I think just the next bit is saying, what are we really talking about now, specifically contextualized mental health? So if I go back and just recap what we said, look at the values, look at the foundation of the conversation, and then look at rebuilding the structure, right? That's the first we talked about. Now saying, within that, how is the conversation happening, right? And the first thing is keeping it open-ended and training our leaders to keep the first part of the conversation open-ended. It's good psychiatric interviews to start with the open-ended question and let the other person talk for a bit, right? How are things going? Has it been stressful? Has it been difficult? Just a simple question like that will give you so much information as a manager that no amount of survey will give you, right? But that only works if the second point of the first part was covered, which is a safe space. If there's a worry about psychological safety or career safety, then you will never get the right information. So that foundation, which is why I covered that part first, that foundation is very important to even get to the specialist bit about mental health, essentially. And the second bit is about saying, how do I actually build trust? And that happens over time. That happens when people build confidence that actually me being open and vulnerable will not lead to negative outcomes. And actually, what accelerates it is if the leaders are open and vulnerable themselves. So actually expressing vulnerability openly really accelerates the journey about their direct reports opening vulnerability to them, and then that can contextualize performance management. If you don't look at this part within as a key factor, then you could look at performance management in isolation, and then you just get a very half-baked picture and could end up losing a very good employee or a very good team member because they were just not well. They were just stressed, they were just not in a good place. And actually, if you help them recount the journey, not only do they bring their full self to the table, but also then have a sense of loyalty because you support them to that journey, basically. So I think there's a lot of upside to bring that conversation. And then, again, as I said, talking about your own journeys of mental health, mental wellness, normalizing the conversation becomes very, very critical. A lot more important than putting an EAP program or having workshops, right? I think actually what helps most when senior leaders come and say, this is my challenge. This is what I did, this is how I experienced it, this is what I did about it. I did a sort of roundtable or a sort of fireside chat with the chairperson of Godrej a couple of years ago. And we worked with them for a while. And after that, we saw the uptake shoot up within the organization because Nisha stood up and said, this is my journey of mental health and this is how I took treatment now. And it was broadcast to the entire global team of Godrej across how many other countries they're working about, all the employees, basically, right? So I think how do you actually normalize conversation becomes very important. And this is the basic stuff, but I don't know how well our junior managers do on doing the basic stuff, right? I mean, it's getting younger and younger, right? I'm working in a large tech organization and the junior managers are 24 years old, 25 years old. And it's like, okay, so somebody really needs to, it's great, but then somebody needs to spend time and energy teaching them about what the basic stuff is. Because it's just not if I can do my technical role well, I'll be able to support and manage people well. That journey is a transition. So how, even the basic stuff I'm saying, okay, help with diary planning for people just coming to the workforce, they've never worked before. Help with the blocking time, help with scheduling, help with the basic nuts and bolts. That's one of your key roles as a young manager, managing a very, very young team. Because that work-life balance, if it doesn't get sort of sorted in the first or second role, we all know that they're just on a journey of like either being labeled as unproductive or not a great team member, or you just drop off sort of yourself because the self-esteem suffers, basically. But the early journey of sort of carrying people through is significantly important if you are going to support successful careers. And I don't know whether, well, actually do know, a lot of our young managers just aren't equipped to be able to support people in that way. Yeah, they'll see, it happens in medicine a lot. When you go through medical training, you are brought up through a culture of abuse every morning at 6 o'clock in the morning when you get shouted at, and then 4 o'clock in the afternoon you get shouted at, 8 o'clock at night you get shouted at, because you just haven't done something right, and that's what you see. And so when you get to that state of being a postgraduate, you start shouting at your interns, and then your boss is shouting at you, and then that cycle is still going on. You go to the medical colleges in Bombay, that cycle still carries on because that's how it's supposed to be. Well, actually, that's not how it's supposed to be, but nobody told us any different. So I think, how do we actually break that cycle? Because that's what we saw. But actually, it's kind of worked because our managers were a lot more experienced in some ways, so they were able to balance it in some ways in some places. But now we're getting very, very young managers through. Are they equipped or not? I don't know. And again, I think we talked about communication, but encourage help-seeking behavior, promote transparent communication. This will only happen if people feel safe. If they're going to worry about their jobs, they're not going to be transparent. Or they're worrying about career growth, they're not going to be transparent. And the best way to do that is be vulnerable yourself and be able to show that I'm able to grow here despite my psychological difficulties or vulnerabilities. So just have that conversation. I think that this is one that is very obvious. Looking at the right tools in training, I think Sunita was talking about how to have a successful one-to-one, how do you leverage, how do you become aware of tools, how do you encourage people to seek out support early around well-being, and all those things become actually part of the performance conversation. Right? Okay, this is what's happening on work, on your sales number, this is how you are doing, and this is how you are growing, and both as a person and at work, and this is what you should, these are the things available that you can access. Training in terms of well-being tools, that should be the holistic conversation. Okay, I'm going to stop here, answer any questions if required, or leave it at that. So, thank you.